17 days into camp, and Shedeur Sanders still sounds like a man who hasn't let any of it get to him yet. "Every day matters," he says. "Every day is worth showing up for the same way. No anxiety, no extra weight on his shoulders. Heading into a practice that's supposed to be the calm before a storm." That's the mindset he brought into the final walkthrough before the Browns head into joint practice with the Bills. And after watching the tape, I think that mindset showed up in how he actually played. Let's set the scene first, because it matters for how you read everything that happened. This was a shorter session, players in shorts, lower intensity than a normal padded day. The kind of practice where teams are usually protecting bodies more than they're pushing for splash plays. And Sanders still found a way to open things up early, connecting on a touchdown in the end zone during one of the first periods of the day. Not a huge headline on its own, but it set the tone for what turned into one of his more complete performances of the entire camp. Now, I want to talk about Deshaun Watson, because this is technically still his job to lose, and I think it's important to be honest about how he actually looked today rather than just running with a narrative. He struggled. 2 interceptions on the day. The first one came on a rollout to his right, a throw where he simply didn't finish it, didn't drive all the way through the route, and an undrafted defensive back who's been making plays all camp made him pay for it. The second interception was even tougher to watch. Watson tried to go deep to Tylan Wallace, put a little too much air under it, and got picked off trying to push the ball vertically. 2 turnovers in a shortened, lower-intensity practice is not what you want to see from the guy who's supposedly locked into this job no matter what happens around him. I want to be careful about how I frame this, because 2 interceptions in a shorts practice in mid-August isn't the same thing as 2 interceptions in a regular season game. Nobody's grading Watson's roster spot off a Tuesday walkthrough, but context only takes you so far here. This wasn't a day where the pass rush was teeing off and forcing bad decisions under duress. This was a lower-intensity session, the kind where a veteran quarterback with Watson's track record and Watson's contract is supposed to look clean, look in command, look like a guy who's already checked the box on winning this competition, regardless of what the numbers say. Instead, he looked a little rattled, a little off with his timing. And that's worth noting, honestly, rather than smoothing over, just because he's the presumptive starter. Compare that to what Sanders did during the same stretch of practice, and the contrast starts to matter more than people want to admit. There was a moment where I genuinely wasn't sure what was about to happen. He dropped back, let it fly toward the end zone, and it was one of the cleanest spirals I've seen him throw all camp. The ball found Jerry Jeudy in the end zone, touchdown. And look, I have to be fair here too, because Jeudy has had some rough drops this camp, including a wide-open score he let slip right through his hands earlier in the week. But this one he caught clean, stepped into it, no drama. That's a full-circle moment for a receiver who's taken some heat, and it's exactly the kind of correction you want to see out of a guy before the lights get brighter in the regular season. Sanders wasn't done there either. He picked up a second touchdown, this one on the ground. A short rushing score that won't show up as a highlight reel throw, but still counts the same on the tracker. And then he found Jeudy again, over the middle, on a completely different kind of throw. Showing touch and timing in a tighter window instead of the deep shot from before. 2 different receivers, 2 different areas of the field. 3 total touchdowns by the count that made it onto the official sheet. Even though I'll be honest with you, I thought Watson should have been credited with more than the one he officially got. However that tally shook out, the eye test and the box score lined up for Sanders today, in a way they haven't always lined up this camp. There's something worth sitting with here about how Jeudy specifically responded after his drop earlier in the week. It would have been easy for a veteran receiver to press after a mistake like that, to start thinking about it on every subsequent target instead of just playing. Instead, he came back and made 2 of the better plays of his entire camp on the same day. One of them a touchdown, the other a tough grab over the middle in traffic. That's the kind of response that builds trust between a quarterback and a receiver room. Sanders throws it. Jeudy makes the play, and the drop from a few days ago starts to feel less like a pattern and more like a blip that got corrected quickly. Chemistry like that doesn't get built overnight, and watching it develop in real time across a camp is one of the more underrated storylines happening on this roster right now. The moment that actually impressed me the most, though, wasn't one of the touchdowns. It was the 2-minute drill. Sanders took over the offense, already behind the sticks on 4th and long. No margin for error, no room to play conservative. He converted it. Then he kept the chains moving with multiple third-down conversions in a row, operating with real urgency and real composure at the same time, which is not an easy combination for a young quarterback to pull off under a ticking clock. There was a moment where the offense appeared to pick up a big gain to the sideline, only for the officials to rule the receiver stayed in bounds. They tried to spike the ball to stop the clock and got flagged for a false start instead, which is the kind of small operational mistake that can completely derail a drive at the wrong moment. It didn't sink this one. Watson's group, working in a different stretch of practice, eventually got their own points on the board too, though it came off a pass interference call rather than a clean drive, which is its own kind of asterisk worth noting. Missed opportunities were part of Sanders' day as well, and I don't want to gloss over that in the interest of a clean story. He left some deeper shots on the field, a couple of throws down the field that had touchdown potential if the timing had been a fraction tighter. Those aren't nothing. In a real game, those incompletions matter, and eventually, the margin for turning near misses into actual points is going to decide how far this version of the offense can go. But the overall body of work today, the ball security, the poise in the pocket, the way he operated the 2-minute period under real pressure, that's the kind of practice that builds trust with a coaching staff, even when a few throws come up empty. I do want to shine a light on the defensive side of the ball for a second, because there was a rookie safety out of Toledo who had himself a legitimately special day. Twice he showed off the kind of closing speed you can't coach, flying from depth to break up throws before they had a chance to become completions. One of those pass breakups came on a ball intended for Harold Fannin. And if you know anything about how well Fannin and Sanders have worked together this camp, you know that's not an easy target to shut down. Whatever his name ends up being spelled as once the roster gets finalized, this is a player worth tracking as this preseason moves forward. That kind of range and physicality out of a rookie safety doesn't happen by accident, and it's exactly the sort of quiet story that gets buried under quarterback headlines but ends up mattering just as much once the season starts. I bring this up because it's easy, understandably, for every single camp update to turn into strictly a quarterback conversation. That's the storyline driving the most engagement. It's the storyline with the most money and the most organizational stakes attached to it. And it's the storyline that's going to define how this season gets remembered, no matter what else happens around it. But rosters are built from 53 names, not one, and a defense that can produce a rookie safety flying around and taking away contested throws from a receiver room that's been one of the more productive units in camp is a defense that's going to help whichever quarterback ends up starting. If this kid keeps showing that kind of range once real pads and real speed get introduced against the Bills tomorrow, that's a name you're going to hear a lot more of by the time roster cuts roll around. Now, let's get into the numbers, because the tracker tells its own version of this story. Sanders finished 17 for 25, which works out to 68%, with 3 touchdowns attached to that line. Watson landed almost identically in terms of accuracy, sitting at 68.6%, but with 2 interceptions weighing down what would otherwise be a comparable day statistically. And I want to give real credit to Dillon Gabriel here too, because it would be easy to write off a 2-for-6 day as a non-factor. Except, both of those 2 completions went for touchdowns. He never got a single first-team rep all camp, and there's been a strange subplot around certain media members insisting he's the best quarterback in this competition despite that lack of opportunity. I'm not here to be unkind about it, but that take has never made sense to me given the reps he's actually been given. Credit where it's due, though. He did what he was asked to do with the limited chances he got. Let's put those 3 lines side by side for a second, because completion percentage alone doesn't tell the whole story here. Sanders and Watson finished within half a point of each other, essentially identical as far as raw accuracy goes. But Sanders did it without turning the ball over once, while Watson gave it away twice on a day where the intensity was supposedly turned down. That's the number that actually separates the two performances, not the completion rate. Turnovers are the one stat in football that swings win probability more than almost anything else. And a quarterback who can post a near-identical completion percentage to the presumed starter while protecting the football better is a quarterback building a legitimate case, whether or not the organization is ready to publicly acknowledge it. So, where does that leave the bigger picture heading into tomorrow? There's a segment of the fan base that's already decided this competition is settled, that Watson's roster spot and financial commitment make this whole conversation more theater than substance. I understand where that comes from, but I'd push back gently on the idea that means the football stops mattering. Whether or not the starting job has already been quietly decided in a coach's meeting somewhere, Sanders is still playing meaningful snaps, still building a case, and still almost certainly going to see the field at some point this season, regardless of how August shakes out. People forget that a year ago, the expectation was that he'd barely see the field at all, and he ended up playing in more games than almost anyone projected, breaking multiple franchise records along the way. Whatever role he ends up in, he's earned the benefit of the doubt that he'll make the most of it. Tomorrow is where things get real. The joint practice against Buffalo is structured with the starters getting a set of 10 reps, the second-team offense getting 7, and Dylan Gabriel rotating in with a smaller set to work with the third team. Sanders and Watson are each going to get a set of 5 reps in a rotation, 5 and 5 and 5, cycling through different groupings as the day goes on. Buffalo runs a completely different scheme than what the Browns' defense shows on a daily basis, and Sanders himself pointed that out when asked about the challenge ahead, saying it's a chance to get as close to real game conditions as possible against different keys, different structures, and a genuinely difficult defense. He sounded excited about it, not nervous, which tracks with everything else about how he's carried himself this camp. I think the structure of those reps matters more than people realize going in. An even 5 and 5 split means neither quarterback gets a built-in advantage in terms of opportunity tomorrow. Nobody can point to unequal reps as an excuse if one guy has a rough day. Whatever happens across those 10 combined snaps between Sanders and Watson is going to be a genuinely fair comparison for the first time in a while, stripped of the second-team versus first-team context that shaped how we've had to read every other practice report this camp. That's exactly why I think tomorrow carries more evaluative weight than almost anything we've seen so far. It's the closest thing to an apples-to-apples test this competition has offered. Worth noting, expect some real physicality tomorrow. Every joint practice across the league this preseason has produced its fair share of scuffles, and given that practice got shut down here recently over exactly that kind of chippiness, there's no reason to think tomorrow will be any calmer once two different rosters with two different agendas start lining up across from each other. If anything, that tension usually escalates in a joint session rather than easing off. Because now it's not just intra-squad pride on the line, it's two coaching staffs each trying to win the day in front of their own front offices. One more thing worth watching, for Sanders specifically. Last time these two teams lined up against each other, he had one of his more impressive performances as a runner, picking up somewhere around 50 rushing yards, making people miss in space, extending plays with his legs when the pocket broke down. I doubt the Browns let him operate quite that freely in a padded joint practice, given the injury concerns already piling up around this roster. But it's a reminder that his game has more layers to it than just what shows up on a completion percentage. That rushing ability is a variable that doesn't get talked about enough when people compare him to Watson directly. A quarterback who can extend a play with his legs changes the math for a defense in ways that pure pocket passers can't replicate. Defensive coordinators have to account for contain rushers, spy defenders, an entire extra layer of design just to keep a mobile quarterback in the pocket. Watson, before the injuries piled up over these last few seasons, had some of that same dynamic ability himself. So it's not like the front office is unfamiliar with what that adds to an offense. Whether the coaching staff is willing to build a scheme around it for Sanders specifically, especially early in a starting role, is a different question. But the tool is there. And tools like that tend to matter more, not less, once a season wears on, and injuries and fatigue start creeping into everyone's legs by November and December. Sanders was asked directly how much tomorrow matters in the bigger picture of this competition, And his answer was consistent with everything he said all camp. Every day matters the same amount to him. No added pressure. No different mindset walking into a joint practice than he'd bring to any other Tuesday. I think that's actually the right approach given where he sits in this competition. His margin for error is smaller than Watson's, smaller than Gabriel's too, for that matter, given the money and the incumbency working against him. Nothing about this path was ever going to be perfect, and he doesn't need it to be. He just needs to keep stacking days like this one, take care of the football, make winning plays when the opportunity is there, and let the body of work speak for itself heading into the regular season. Based on day 17, that's exactly what he's doing.